Hey everybody, it is Chris, and I'm done talking about revealing the new player's handbook. Now I want to start to analyze the new player's handbook, and we're going to begin with damage. Now, I know that I've been criticized before about focusing too much on damage when there's so much more to D&D, and I promise I'll get into that other stuff eventually, but I do think damage is a good place to start because we can do some objective analysis by punching some math, which I've done. So you don't have to punch it. I'll show it to you, and then you can check my work if you like. Or you can just look at graphs and see the differences. But first, I do want to address the red elephant in the room. Yes, I have a little bit of a burn down here. So if you notice some red, that's what it is. I went whale watching yesterday, saw some finback whales. It was very cool. But I was wearing a hat, but I got some sun anyways. So if you're wondering what that is, that's what it is. All right. So I want to talk about damage first. Now I'm going to show you a graph. Here's a graph. This is what I call the Warlock baseline. I have been using this for years and years and years with the old rules. And this graph kind of shows how much damage a Warlock using Eldritch Blast should expect to do. Now, a lot of assumptions go into this graph. So you can see level across the bottom and DPR across the left side. DPR stands for damage per round. And the assumptions I make are that we're going to make a Warlock. We're going to start with a +3 Charisma modifier. It's going to become +4 at level 4, and +5 at level 8. The next thing I assume is that we're going to take the Hex spell, and we're going to cast the Hex spell on our enemies, and we're going to have it all the time. So I assume that we're maintaining our concentration, or if we lose it, we're able to recast without any difficulty, so that we have it for every combat. Can we assume that? We can assume that. We can't be confident of that, but we can assume it. We have to make assumptions when we're talking about DPR. So that's one of the assumptions I make. Another assumption I make is that we have no special way of getting advantage or disadvantage. Obviously, things happen in game that will give you advantage or disadvantage, but for here, I'm just assuming no advantage or disadvantage unless, we're talking about a build that has its own way to generate its own advantage, which a standard Warlock doesn't have. Now, in my old assumptions, so what I used to do, and this is now years ago, but what I used to do is I used to assume that when I calculated damage, that our character was going to be doing 8 combats per long rest, 4 rounds per combat, 1 short rest in the middle. And the feedback I got so much that I abandoned that was that is way, way, way too long. And I do think it depends. Right? I have played in adventures where we have had 8 combats in 1 long rest with 1 short rest. But I get that that's not normal, right? And so I wanted to come up with something that's maybe a little bit more normal. So I'm going to be assuming 4 combats per long rest with 1 short rest in the middle. And I know that doesn't necessarily match what you normally see at your table. This is just kind of, I have to go with something, and every table is different. But I agree that my old system was way too long, which is why I abandoned it a long time ago. But what I'm going to be doing now is 4 combats per long rest, short rest in the middle. So if you at your table, you normally see fewer combats than that, or more short rests than that, or the other way around, well, take my results with that grain of salt, right? You are going to see all the math I do. So you can make adjustments to fit the style of play you have, because just keep in mind it's not necessarily the same as other viewers or me. Okay, so that's the Warlock baseline. It didn't change at all in 2024. I thought it was going to change when they were looking at changing the Hex spell, but they kept the Hex spell basically the same. Eldritch Blast is basically the same. Agonizing Blast can be applied to different cantrips, but you still want to apply it to Eldritch Blast, so it's basically the same. So this really didn't change the graph at all, and the assumptions for the number of combats doesn't change the math for the Warlock either. So I could keep using this Warlock baseline, and it's still an accurate number. But what this Warlock baseline worked really well for in 2014 was when I think of a baseline, what I'm thinking of is something to compare to that is a starting point. So I wanted something that on the lower end of what we would expect damage wise, but something that still I think does okay damage. And Warlock is what came to mind based on the experience I had with D&D. Now, the question is this still decent damage with 2024 D&D? And that's what I think we need to find out. Because if it's not, then I can't be using this as my baseline anymore. So what I'm going to be doing in a series of videos is I'm going to be going class by class and looking at damage builds and comparing them to the Warlock baseline and seeing how they do. And if everything blows the Warlock baseline away, I don't think we can use it anymore. I think we need to come up with something else. Now, another thing that has been mentioned in recent years, I should say, is that one issue with this baseline is I assume no magic items. So this Warlock baseline does not assume that we're going to have Rod of the Packkeeper or Wand of the War Mage, and then I'll compare it to builds that I assume no magic weapons. And when I first came up with this system, my assumption was, well, it kind of averages out or cancels out, right? This build has a magic weapon, that build doesn't have a magic weapon. Well, that I can't predict that, right? I can only guess what you might have, but if I take it out of the equation altogether, I could assume it all cancels out. The problem is that things changed. That worked pretty well originally, but then they introduced things like the Artificer, and the Artificer can create its own magic weapons, and probably will create its own magic weapons. But if I do DPR calculations, assuming those magic weapons against builds that don't assume magic weapons, then I get kind of skewed numbers, and they're a little misleading. It makes those kind of builds look better than they otherwise would be. Now, the Artificer isn't in the 2024 Player's Handbook, but what is in the Player's Handbook is Magic Weapon, the Magic Weapon spell, and it is a better spell than ever. It doesn't use concentration, so maybe characters that could get Magic Weapon would cast it. On the other hand, if they already have a Magic Weapon, then maybe it's not worth them casting. Maybe it wouldn't do anything. So I think, to begin with, I've got to recognize that the Dungeon Master's Guide has not come out yet as of recording this video. So I don't know if there's going to be good information as to what to expect. The Player's Handbook has a little bit at the beginning as to, what you would start a character with at various levels. That might be my best guide to include magic items for characters. And I might incorporate that, but I want to hold off until the Dungeon Master's Guide comes out. So for now, I'm still going to assume no magic weapons, and I'm just going to assume no magic weapon spell. And I think that's easy enough to do, and I think it's going to give us some decent information. So here is the Warlock baseline. We can see that, the progression is very predictable. At level 1, we start out with not a lot of damage. You can see there's a little bump at level 2 because we add Agonizing Blast. A little bump at level 4 because our Charisma went up. Then at level 5, there's a big bump because we get our second Eldritch Blast. Then a little bump at level 8 because our Charisma goes up to +5. Then a big bump at 11 when we get our third Eldritch Blast. And a big bump at 17 when we get our fourth Eldritch Blast. And that's it. That's the entire Warlock baseline. And my assumption is that based on the ability score increases that I mentioned before, 4 and 8, to go from 3 to 4 to 5, that we're always going to have a 60% base chance to hit. So if I'm going to compare it to something else that isn't increasing at those levels, then their chance to hit will be adjusted by 5% one way or the other, or by from 55% from 60% is what I mean. And then it will take that into account. Okay, so that's the Warlock baseline, and the class I want to look at today is the Monk, because the Monk was the class I complained about the damage for in the 2014 rules. So I want to start with looking at the 2014 Monk and explain why I thought it wasn't very good. So I've recalculated the 2014 monk based on my new assumptions because, like I said, I'm assuming fewer combats per short rest and fewer combats per long rest, and the monk's getting key points back every short rest and every long rest. And I can actually calculate how often they can use Flurry of Blows if they're going to use Flurry of Blows as often as they can. Which, if you're just looking to increase your damage and you're not looking for control or anything like that, then it's really the best tool you have. So this is what we would look at for ability scores, probably Dex +1, Wisdom +1, Constitution +1. That's usually our best spread for a monk. And then I just dumped Strength, Intelligence, and Charisma, and we're just going to go Dex 16, Con 16, Wisdom 16. And if we want to focus on offense and not on control, then our best bet is to increase our dexterity, not our wisdom. I've been told by some people that increasing wisdom is the best way to go with monk because you have a better chance of your stunning strike working. I get that point of view, but if we are just looking at damage numbers, dexterity is the way we want to go. So for ability score increases, level 4, we do Dex +2, gets us to an 18. Level 8, we get Dex +2, gets us to 20. Then we increase our wisdom to 20. And then I threw Defensive Duelist on at 19. There's not really a good offensive feat for us to take with the monk using the 2014 rules. That will change a little bit with the 2024 rules. So assumptions: 4 rounds per combat, 2 combats per short rest, 4 combats per long rest, 16 rounds of combat per long rest. Flurry of Blows, we're going to do it as often as we can. And I'm going to spend no other key points on offense. So no stunning strikes or anything like that. I'm not worrying about that. It gets the math very complicated. Stunning strike doesn't add to damage, but it could potentially add to your damage on, your next attack or attacks. But there's the number of assumptions I have to make is kind of wild for that. So I'm just assuming Flurry of Blows as much as we can. At level 1, I basically assume we're going to start with a quarterstaff and use the versatile property to get a d8 on damage, and then we're going to get martial arts, and that's going to give us a bonus action attack. Our martial arts die at level 1 with the 2014 rules is a d4, and you can see my calculations there, and I come up with 8.3. Then we got level 2, we're going to add Flurry of Blows. We're going to get 4 key points per long rest. That means 25% of rounds. I'm going to use Flurry of Blows. There's the math, and you can see that our DPR goes to 9.0. Now you can see there's a middle column there where I say DPR total. I'm just adding up level by level. So level 1 DPR plus level 2 DPR plus level 3 DPR, etc. At level 3, we have 6 key per long rest. So that's 38% of rounds have Flurry of Blows. There's our number, DPR 9.4. Then level 4, Dex to +4. We're going to use Flurry of Blows 50% of the time. We're up to 11.3. Level 5, extra attack, and we're going to attack with our quarterstaff an extra time. Our martial arts die has become a D6. We're going to be able to Flurry of Blow 63% of the time, and our DPR goes to 18.3. Level 6, 12 key per long rest. That's 75% of the time we can Flurry of Blows. We're up to 18.8. Level 7, 14 key per long rest. Now 88% of the rounds have Flurry of Blows. There's our math. It's 19.4 DPR. And then level 8, our dexterity goes to +5. We can now Flurry of Blows with every single attack, and our DPR goes to 22.4. Level 9, there's no change. We're still at 22.4. Same with level 10. Level 11, our martial arts damage die goes to a D8. So now it doesn't matter whether we're attacking with a quarterstaff or unarmed strike or a dagger. All attacks will do the same damage. And it will be a total of 23.6 DPR. Then our damage isn't going to change for a long time. Level 12, level 13, level 14, level 15, level 16, our math is the same, 23.6. At level 17, we get a bit of a boost because our martial arts die becomes a D10, so we go to 26.4. Level 18, it's still 26.4. Level 19, level 20, still 26.4. You can see here on the column where I've added up all those DPRs, it adds up to a total of 408.9. And the reason I do that is I can now come up with a number. If I take 408.9 divided by 20, that means our average DPR, based on 20 levels, 1 through 20, is 20.4 per round. And I can tell you that the Warlock baseline is 20.3 per round. So with the new assumptions for long rest and short rest, the Warlock now actually meets baseline overall. Still doesn't look great on a graph, though. Here's what it looks like. So the blue is the Warlock baseline, and the red is the 2014 Monk. And what we see is the Monk starts out okay at level 1 and is doing okay. And in level 5, things get tight against baseline, but we're still ahead. Then at level 8, when we increase our dexterity, that does really help. Should mention that if we do not increase our dexterity and we increase our wisdom, we are already behind baseline. But this is, again, assuming dexterity based. Where we notice the pain is everything after level 8, because we can see that we don't really get any good scaling after level 8. We get a little bit at level 11 and a little bit more at level 17. But the difference between level 8 DPR and the level 20 DPR isn't that much. But the Warlock is scaling. So by level 11, the Warlock is doing more damage than the Monk. And if the Warlock baseline is supposed to be like the starting point, the low end, that shouldn't happen, right? We shouldn't have the baseline skipping ahead of our damage. But that's what happens here. And so that's the issue with the 2014 Monk. Like I said, it looks better on this graph than it used to, because in my old assumptions, I assumed you had fewer key points to spend in each battle. And that meant that fewer flurry of blows, which put that red line down. So I have increased it. It still doesn't look good. Still does not look good. So the question is, did 2024 fix this? And so let's look at the math for that. So I've got a Monk here. Now, I should mention, I'm not worrying about subclass here, because I didn't worry about subclass for Warlock, right? I could take the Genie Pact and add a little bit of damage, and I didn't do that. So for my base assumptions with the Monk, this is just a very basic build. No subclass, and I'm not worrying about getting a species that's going to increase our damage either. There are some options. We could take a Goliath with the Fire Giant option and add a D10 once in a while. But I'm just going to take that out of the equation, because we could do that with any build, right? So we're not going to worry about subclass. We're not going to worry about species. We are going to worry about background. And to start with, I'm going to be looking at backgrounds straight from the 2024 Player's Handbook, rather than looking at old backgrounds and then customizing them in order to update them to the 2024 rules, which is better. For the Monk, it's no problem. I want Sailor anyways. It's going to give me dexterity and wisdom and the Tavern Brawler feat, and I wanted all that. So I'm fine using the 2024 backgrounds. If I was to customize an old background, I might do this anyway. Ability scores, gonna maximize my dex at 17, wisdom to 16, everything. I mean, dexterity is really the only one that matters for our damage calculations. And so the feats, at level 1, I'll have Tavern Brawler through the background. Level 4, I'm going to take Weapon Master. So the Weapon Master feat is the one that gives us weapon mastery. Monks normally don't get it. It also gives us a +1 to an ability score. I'm going to increase dexterity to 18. And we select one weapon. And the weapon I'll select is the dagger that has the Nick property. We could select a different weapon with the Nick property. It's got to have the Nick property, or there's no point in doing it. But the thing about the dagger, I figure, is that it's scaling with our damage along with everything else, because it uses our martial arts die, and we can throw it. So it gives us a little bit of flexibility. I figure it's a good weapon to pick. And then we're increasing our dexterity to 20 at level 8. And the rest doesn't matter. You can put in different feats. I assumed that the Monk would probably want to increase their wisdom. And then at level 19, we get an epic boon feat. And I select the epic boon of combat prowess. That's the one where if you miss with an attack on your turn, you can just hit instead, which is pretty good. And it's a nice damage boost for this Monk. Assumptions, 4-round combat, 2 combats per short rest, blah, blah, blah. This is all the same. Flurry of blows as often as possible. I'm going to just try to keep it as close as I can to the same assumptions I made to the 2014 Monk, so we can get a decent comparison. Okay? So let's look at math. So, level 1, we're going to begin with Tavern Brawler. That allows us to re-roll any ones we have on our unarmed strikes. And I'll tell you that a d6, the average result, if we can re-roll a 1, is 3.9. I could go through the math, and I probably will in some future video. I was thinking of doing a video covering how Savage Attacker, how Piercer, how Tavern Brawler, how Great Weapon, Great Weapon Fighting now affects average damage, and that might be its own video. For now, just take my word for it. 3.9 is your average. We're going to have Martial Arts for a bonus action attack, and I'm going to assume at level 1, all our attacks are unarmed. Martial Arts die starts at a d6 with a 3.9 average. There's the damage on the right. DPR is 8.6. Okay, so level 2. Now we are going to add Uncanny Metabolism. The old monk didn't have this. Once per long rest, we can restore our key points. So we're actually going to have 6 to spend per long rest. And that means 38% of rounds will use Flurry of Blows. And so once we add that and Flurry of Blows, our DPR goes to 10.2 at level 2. And then at level 3, then we got 9 key points, or focus points, I should say, per long rest. I'll get used to that. 56% of rounds use Flurry of Blows. Our DPR goes to 11. So we're going to get these little tiny DPR increases as the number of Flurry of Blows that we have increases. And then let's move on. Level 4, the math gets a little more complicated because we are going to increase our dexterity to +4, but we're also going to add a dagger attack that will have the nick property. And so we're going to need to hold 2 daggers, 2 different daggers. And then what we'll do is our action attack with a dagger. Then our bonus action attack or a flurry of blows, depending which one, will be an unarmed attack. And then our nick attack will be a dagger. That will not add our dexterity modifier because we don't have the 2-weapon fighting style, and there's no easy way to get it. And I should also mention that when we were talking about the average damage with Tavern Brawler, that applies to our unarmed strikes. It does not apply to our dagger attacks. That's why it matters. We're going to be using Flurry of Blows 75% of rounds. And here's the math on the right. Our DPR goes to 15.6. Level 5, we add extra attack. So now our attack action will be 1 dagger attack and 1 unarmed strike, because unarmed strikes are just better than dagger attacks for us because we add Tavern Brawler. Bonus action or Flurry of Blows is just unarmed strikes, and nick attack with a dagger. Our martial arts die is now D8. That will be a 4.9 for unarmed strikes, 4.5 average for dagger attacks. 94% of the time we're using Flurry of Blows, so almost all the time. And there's our damage, and it's a DPR of 24.4. Level 6, now we can Flurry Blows every single round, and our damage goes to 24.7. Level 7, there's no change to our DPR, still 24.7. Then at level 8, our dexterity is going to go to +5, so that jumps it up to 27.1. Level 9, we're still 27.1. I should mention that 27.1 is higher than the old monk did at level 20. Okay. At level 10, our Flurry of Blows is now going to add 3 attacks. So we get a pretty good jump to our damage here, up to 33.2. Level 11, our martial arts die goes to a D10. That's an average of 6.0 with Tavern Brawler, or 5.5 without. So there's the math. Our damage goes to 37.8, and you can see at level 12 it stays the same, and at level 13 it stays the same. It also stays the same at level 14, 15, and 16, then it's going to jump. At level 17, we go to a D12 for martial arts die, so even our dagger with the nick property is still doing a D12 damage. There's the math, we're up to 41.8. Stay at 41.8 at level 18, and then as I mentioned, we're going to take the epic boon of combat prowess that says that, if we miss with an attack, we can hit instead once per turn. So our combat attack order matters now, because what we want to do is we want to use our best attacks first in case they miss. Then we can apply the boon of combat prowess and then work our way down. So what we're going to start with is our Flurry of Blows and do 3 attacks, which we can do now in the 2024 rules. Then our attack action, we'll do 1 unarmed strike. And then we'll do the dagger attack that doesn't benefit from Tavern Brawler. And then we'll do the nick attack with our other hand dagger that doesn't get our dex modifier either. And that gives us the best chance to use Boon of Combat Prowess for the highest damage attack possible. Our chance to turn a miss into a hit, and of course, keep in mind, I'm not going to calculate critical hits for this because it doesn't turn our hit into a critical hit. There's an 87% chance of those first 4 attacks with unarmed strikes that one of them will miss. At least one of them. Then, if that doesn't happen, well, there's still a 5% chance that it would happen with the dagger attack, and a 3% chance it would happen with the nick attack, and then the remainder there, which would be 5% chance that we won't get to use it at all. And so we're going to take our 41.8 DPR from level 18, and then we're going to add the additional damage from a free hit. And so there's the math for it. That's a lot. Gets us up to 53.0. I mentioned when I talked about epic boons, and I've mentioned it several times in my reveal videos, that epic boons are good. You can see this is a jump of over 11 DPR for 1 feat. That's exceptional. Then at level 20, we get the new Monk Capstone, which increases our dexterity and our wisdom by 2 each. So our dexterity and wisdom are both going to end up with a +7 modifier. That's going to be great for our armor class, but it's also good for our offense. Our chance to turn a miss into a hit actually has gone down because our chance to hit went up. So 76% chance of applying it to an unarmed strike, 10% with a dagger, 6% with a nick attack. But we're doing more damage with all our attacks now, and hitting more often with all our attacks. You can see that instead of a 60% chance to hit, I'm now assuming a 70% chance to hit, because most characters are going to have a +5 modifier with their ability scores, including the Warlock. So our DPR goes to 65.7 at level 20. If I take the total, remember I was adding the total damage or DPRs for the old monk? Well, if I add all the DPRs for the new monk, it's 635.7. If I divide that over 20 levels, that's 31.8 average DPR over 20 levels. That's 57% over the old Warlock baseline or the new Warlock baseline, and 56% over the 2014 monk. Here's what it looks like on a graph. So the blue line is the Warlock baseline, the red line is the 2014 monk, and the green line is the 2024 monk. That is quite a difference. You can see that from level 2, it's already ahead. And by level 4, it's building the gap. Level 5, even more. Level 10, I mean, we had that third Flurry of Blows attack. You can see the jump there. Then again, another big jump at level 11. And we're just way above everything. All the way up, and then level 17, we get a nice jump, and then we add an epic boon, and we get this huge spike at level 19, and then we get the Monk Capstone, and we get another just massive spike at level 20. So you can see here, against the old Warlock baseline, 56% over, easy to see why. It's just killing it right after level 1, all the way down. So yeah, the Warlock damage looks pretty good now. I don't want to finish the video yet, though. I want to go a little bit further. What happens if we do some optimization and add a subclass? How does that compare to what we see here? Now, I am going to have to make some assumptions here, so keep that in mind when you see these numbers. Keep in mind the assumptions I'm making. But we're going to do Warrior of Shadow. That's the one they can cast Darkness using 1 focus point, and they can see through it. But, of course, it's magical darkness, the darkness spell, so dark vision cannot see through it. And same build otherwise as the other one. And then assumptions, 4 rounds per combat, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to assume Shadow Arts. Darkness lasts 1 combat. So that's what I'm going to assume, is that Darkness is a concentration spell, lasts 10 minutes. I'm going to assume that we're going to have to recast it before every combat, but I'm also going to assume that we've been able to cast it before a combat. I often do that for a 10-minute spell. For a 1-minute spell, I generally assume you have to cast it on round 1. With a 10-minute spell, I figure quite often you can do it beforehand. So with my math here, I'm assuming we're doing it beforehand. I'm also assuming the enemy doesn't have True Sight or Blind Sight, because if they do, then Darkness doesn't help us. So we've got to keep that in mind as well. So level 1 and level 2 are the same as without a subclass. There's your math. Level 3, things change a bit. The percentage of rounds we'll be using Flurry of Blows goes down to the 2024 monk because we are going to have to spend 1 focus point on darkness for each combat. On the other hand, we're going to have advantage. So you can see our chance to hit goes up to 84%, our chance to crit goes up to 10%, and I always get told it's a little bit below 10%. Yes, I round off, so it's 10%. Okay, and my damage numbers here as well, I round off to 1 decimal place. So if you're noticing something and you're thinking that looks a little higher or lower than it should be, it's probably because I've rounded it to 1 decimal place. But our DPR is 14.3. Then at level 4, it goes to 20.5. And I'm just going to kind of go through the math quickly here because it's mostly the same as the 24 monk, except that we're having advantage and we're using Flurry of Blows a little bit less often. But we go to 33.3 at level 5, 34.8 at level 6, 35.8 at level 7, and now we're using Flurry of Blows all the time. At level 8, 39.1, level 9 is also 39.1, level 10 we go to 47.9, level 11 we go to 53.8, level 12, 53.8, level 13, 53.8, level 14, 53.8, level 15, 53.8, level 16, 53.8, and is about to change. Level 17, we go to 59.7, which is also level 18. And I didn't take the boon of combat prowess at level 19 because when I calculated my chance to miss with at least 1 attack, it wasn't that high. And that's because we have advantage on all our attacks, so it's not as good. And honestly, I just looked through the epic boons and thought, what would I probably take with a Shadow Monk? I'd probably take Boon of the Night Spirit, which looks pretty cool. Doesn't add to our damage at all, but it's the epic boon I'd probably take. So, I think if I want to be genuine, that's what I should put here. And so we stay at 59.7 at level 19. We don't have that big jump. And then at level 20, we go to 73.2 because of the Monk Capstone. So how much damage is that? That's 858.7 total DPR over 20 levels. Divided by 20 is 42.9. That is 112% over the Warlock baseline, 35% over the 2024 Monk, and 110% over the 2014 Monk. Let's look at it on a graph. So the dark green line is the Shadow Monk, and you can see it just blows everything out of the water. The only thing that comes even somewhat close is the 2024 subclassless Monk, but that's how much kind of damage that adding advantage is going to have, even if you're using Flurry of Blows less often. So, yeah, I'd say at level 19, they're not that far apart. And at level 20, they're not that far apart. But when I look between levels 5 through level, 18, that's a pretty big range of massive gap between them. I should mention I've done damage calculations already for many different classes, and the Shadow Monk looks really good. But again, I should just mention, this is assuming we already have our darkness spell up. This is assuming the enemies cannot see us, which, we won't have 100% of the time. It should be most of the time, but not 100% of the time. So you won't necessarily have that damage. But at worst, you can have the light green line in damage, right? So that's still pretty good. So I want to finish off with just the DPR values. DPR of each level averaged. The Warlock is 20.3. We will be coming back to that in future videos. The 2014 Monk, this is probably the last time I'm going to mention it. It's 20.4. Goodbye, 2014 Monk. I probably won't mention it in any of my future videos here. 2024 Monk is now 31.8, and if we optimize it with a Shadow Monk, we have to make some assumptions. It's 42.9. Now, could we increase our damage even further if we Stunning Strike with our first attack, and then, we're going to at least get advantage on our next attack, even if they make their save? Yeah, we could. Would complicate the math. But it would increase the damage somewhat. But it means more assumptions that I have to make, and I want to try to do these values with as few assumptions as possible. It's impossible to avoid any assumptions, but I want to try to reduce them as much as I can, so that I can actually compare different classes. So as I go through different classes, these are the numbers I'm going to be coming back to for the monk, so that we can compare and see how these damages compare to each other, and see how they compare to the warlock, and see if the warlock baseline still has value in 2024, or if we need to change it. So that is my first damage video. I hope you found it informative. I know a lot of math. If you're not into math, I'm sorry. But I hope you found it at least informative. And we're going to do a lot more videos like this. So I hope you enjoyed it. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.